let me know. And if so, let me know. Always want to get that feedback. Doing this through the internet's a little different because I really do like to have the crowd interaction. And so it's a little more difficult to have that crowd interaction when everybody's scattered across the country and the internet world. But we'll do our best as we can. The content still doesn't change, though. So I'll be speaking to y'all today about bull and female selection. And the subtitle I gave this is "It's More Than Skin Deep." And the reason I say that is a lot of times producers that I work with will get hung up on, well, she's got to be a certain color, the bull's got to be a certain color, and the calf has to be a certain color. In today's day and age, that's not necessarily true. When I was going to college 20-something, almost 30 years ago now, that was the truth. The black was beautiful, and if you wanted to get the big premiums, it had to be a black-hided animal. But now every breed association has done a really good job of marketing their animals and marketing their breeds. And so there's premiums that can be had no matter what color that animal is nowadays. So I say it's more than skin deep because I really want those animals to be a good performing animal for you, the cattle producer, to be an efficient animal and be something that's going to be able to be a money maker and a profit maker, and what I call a realizer for you for a really, really long time. So with that said, we're gonna talk about a couple things. The first one that everybody asks me is, what's the ideal cow? And you notice in this picture, I cut her out and just gave you just that blank silhouette. And you can paint whatever phenotype you want in there, whatever color combination you want. It matters not to me as long as she's doing you a good job and she's making you money and she's having a successful life in the enterprise in which you put her in, which is the management that you provide for her and the environment that she is expected to work in. And then likewise, what's the perfect bull? And I tell everybody when they ask that question, first off, I say it depends. And I'll just use it for a real recent example. 20 minutes ago, during my lunch hour, I had a phone call from an individual that was asking what I think about this breed. And I started off with, it depends. What are your goals for that breed? Why do you want that breed? Because it would be a change up from the two breeds that individual already had. That individual was using Angus for maternal herd and just a straight Angus commercial cow, and was thinking about adding another breed in there, Hereford. I'll say what it is. And then on their terminal program, they were using Charlotte. And they were asking, well, what do I think about adding Hereford in there? I said, what's your goals for that? And because that all depends. If your goal is something that's not what that breed excels at, then you're kind of working an uphill battle. But if that breed excels at it, then sure, that's a breed you ought to consider. And so it all depends. And a big part of what it depends on is when are you going to market your cattle? We need to think about that always, all the time, so that way what you're going to do, what your expectations of your outcomes are. And I always tell every producer to start at the end and work your way back. So start with how you want to market your cattle and when you want to market your cattle to determine what type of breeding situation you're going to have, when you're going to breed, and how you're going to do that breeding. So are you going to sell your calves at weaning? And that could be a balling calf coming right off the cow or after a preconditioning program. Either way, you're selling the calf and he's going to leave the ranch gate and your ownership ceases to exist at that point. Or are you going to carry that calf on into a feedlot and retain ownership in the feedlot, but you're going to sell him as a live animal to the packer? Or are you going to take him all the way and you're going to own that calf when he draws his last breath, and you're going to take a price on him based upon how he cuts out and based on the grid? All those factors are going to depend on what do you build into your bull and what do you build into your cow herd, so that way you can be the most profitable and the most efficient producer for the circumstances in which you expect to work within. And there's an old saying, the bull should fit the market. The other half of that saying is the cow should fit their environment. And those of y'all that have heard me speak before know that I've said that many, many times over again, that you got to remember that bull, he gets 9-10 months off. where he's not doing anything but laying around and getting in trouble. The cow has to work year round. She's either lactating or she's lactating and gestating both. She doesn't get a day off, so she's got to fit her environment. Like I said earlier, that environment's your management and the physical environment that she has to live in. So when we think about the bull, what goes into making up that perfect bull? There's a lot of factors that go into it. First, I want you to think about your breed that you want and why do you want that particular breed. Not just because he's pretty. I get producers, you'd be surprised how many times I get that as an answer. Well, he's a pretty animal. I want you to think past the breed. What characteristics does that breed bring to the table or bring to your pasture that's going to make your operation that more efficient and that much more profitable and successful? And then think about what kind of bull you want within that breed. So look at his performance and pedigree, look at his phenotype, look at his EPDs, and then look at his age. Typically I tell people to buy a virgin bull. I'm not a big fan of buying what I call a used bull, because when you buy a used bull, you're probably buying somebody else's problem with that as well. And there's always potential for problems to be brought into your herd through the form of venereal disease or other issues such as that. And so I typically tell everybody, let's look at a virgin bull. Okay, so now we've kind of decided what kind of bull we want to have. Let's think about the phenotype of that bull. He's got to be structurally correct. I want him to be balanced from front to back, top to bottom. I want you to think about a big rectangle. And I want that rectangle to be as long as possible, as deep as possible, and as wide as possible. I want him to be thick and long and tall. I want him to have lots of gut and lots of butt. That's one thing. Probably 15 years ago, I had an order buyer do a program for a group of our producers. And I asked him, I said, what do you look for phenotypically? And that's what he said, lots of butt and lots of gut. He said, if they got lots of butt, that's where a lot of the high dollar cuts are. And that if they've got a lot of rear end muscle, that's going to transfer across the back into those ribeye cuts. And he said lots of gut because he wants them to have the ability to be able to eat. And if he can eat a lot, then he's going to be able to convert, was his comment. Want that bull to be heavy muscle. When we talk about in the industry, we talk about that he's going to be a grade 1, 1.5, or 2. We want all of our calves to be a number 1 muscle. So that means they're going to be heavy muscle, good structure in them, good bone. 1.5 or 2, 1.5, you won't see a lot of discounts with a number 2 muscle. You sure will see some discounts. So I want them to be heavy muscle. And then correct angles. This doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to be a good, make good feeder calves if he doesn't have good angles. But what I'm saying by that is I want him to have good angle on his feet, translate from his hoof into his pastern area. And that's going to translate up through his knees in the front, his hocks in the back, and all the way up into the angles on the shoulder. An animal that's real steep angled on the point of the shoulder up to the top of his shoulder, he's going to move out real coarse and real rough. And he's going to have a lower longevity. He's not going to last as long. Likewise, on the rear end, if he's post-legged, if you can take when you're looking at the animal in real time, in real person, and you can take your pin and you can stick it up in front of you, and you can look at that leg, and that leg is hidden mostly behind that pin, that's a problem. It doesn't have enough set to that hock, and it's going to break down. Likewise, we think about that front end. If it's real steep in the front, think about what a bull's job is. It's to mount a cow. If he's real steep angled in the front, when he mounts that cow and gets done doing his job and dismounts, if he's real steep, when he comes down onto those front legs, he's got a lot of pounds per square inch coming down onto that small surface area of that hoof. If he's real steep in the angle, that's a lot of jarring activity that goes on. And the analogy I use for you is everybody, I want this as a homework assignment. After this presentation's over, I want you to climb in the back of your pickup, drop your tailgate, jump out of the back of your pickup, but lock your knees. How many of y'all want to do that? Just think about it right now. Probably just makes you cringe thinking about how it's going to jar your knees and your hips and your back if you do that. Same thing with the bull. If he's real straight angled, that's what's going to happen to him. He's going to have adequate testicle size and correct shape and structure. I don't want a twisted testicle. I want him to have enough testicle there, enough volume to be able to produce enough sperm to be able to get the job done. So that's kind of a real brief analysis of the phenotype. This is kind of an example here. I want that bull to have a lot of muscle expression, excuse me, down through his stifle, as far down into his hock as possible. I want him to be kind of thick made between the hocks, and I don't want his hocks being angled out or angled in. I want them to be set straight, and there to be plenty of distance in between those hocks. So that way I can see that he's got a good full scrotum there as well. One thing I get a lot of, especially from producers that run multiple bull batteries, I tell everybody, make them all one color. I don't care what color you make them, just make them all one color. Because when you take if you've got a multiple bull battery, 2 bulls or more, and you put different colors or different breeds in there, you're automatically hurting yourself when you get ready to sell it. The golden caveat, the golden thing that we try to, the holy grail that we try to reach in the cattle business for the cow-calf producer is that semi-truckload. In order to get to that semi-truckload, they've got to be uniform. So number one, it's sex. We can't do a lot about that unless we're using sex semen. We're going to have some heifers, we're going to have some steers. But we can't do much about that. But we can do things about making them uniform in size and type. So the more defined our breeding season can be, the better off we'll be. The tighter that breeding season can be, the more uniform that calf. Just as a rule of thumb, think about your calves. They'll grow at about 2 to 2.5. If you've got real high performance calves, maybe 2 3/4 pounds a day fall on the cow. So if I've got a 90-day calving season, right there I can have over a 200-pound variation in weight just based upon my 90-day calving season. Likewise, if you think about a 90-day calving season, that also means I'm not within a 365-day cycle. So the tighter we have that calving season, the better off we are. So let's make them all one color. That's one less cut the order buyer will make on your cattle, and that means you can have bigger groups of cattle. Use registered bulls. Like I said, I don't care if he's a black bull, a red bull, gray, white, whatever color you want. But make sure he's a registered bull. And why do I say registered bull? There's a lot of predictability that can come when I use a registered bull. Because I can look at his pedigree, I can look at his EPDs, I can look at the familial history, talk to the breeder, and he can tell me a lot about those family lines, from disposition to if they're going to be an easy keeping type of animal to how they're going to calve. So that registered bull is real important. And also, things are not always as they appear. If you look at that bull, I guarantee you there's some people on this program today that think that subscribe to the old wise tale that a bull has to have a small head. If he doesn't have a small head, you're going to have calving problems. That's at least from my words, is the size of that bull, or the size of his head, that is. If you think about it, the first thing that comes out, if they're calving appropriately, are the front feet. And so the front feet act as the way that that calf parks the water, so to speak. Think about it, if you were to dive into a swimming pool, what do? We put our hands out in front of our head so we can kind of cut through the water. That's what the feet do for the calf. They kind of help cut through everything. And the head is it's a small part of the animal. The larger part is the shoulders, the body, and the hips. So just because he has a small head doesn't mean he's going to be an easy calving bull. Now, if I don't buy a registered bull, I'm kind of buying that old story of the brown bag special. Think back to those of y'all that are old enough to remember that. Go back and get that brown bag special. And I remember I used to go to the store and I'd pay them a quarter. And that anticipation was always the most fun part about it. You never knew what you were going to get. It might be something that was kind of a dud, or it might be something that was pretty cool, or a nice piece of candy or something. But we didn't know until we opened that bag up and saw what it is. In my breeding program, I don't want to know or want to have that kind of anticipation, because in my breeding program, I'm not going to get excited about that. That anticipation is going to make me worry. I want to have that predictability that registered bull can bring to the table by using those EPDs to the greatest extent and power that I have available. So what is an EPD? EPD is called an expected progeny difference. And what it is, it's an estimate of how the future progeny of each sire is expected to perform relative to the progeny of other sires listed within that breed's database. The way we develop those is we will take that sire and we'll have what we call sire groups or their contemporary groups. And if y'all were online back in November, we talked about this. So this will be a little bit of a refresher, but what we do is we take those animals, that sire or group of sires, and then we'll have a reference sire. And then that reference sire is a bull that's widely used across the country. Probably an AI sire is typically how we do that. And because we have that reference sire in there, we're able to kind of take out the effects of management, location in the country that the animals are being reared in, as well as what they're eating and the environment that they're in at that time. We set that all kind of at an equal level by having that reference sire in there. And by doing that, we're able to develop this database called EPDs. And that really confers a lot of predictability to the calf crop out of those animals, more so than ever before. And I think that's one reason why our industry has progressed so fast in the last 20 years is because EPDs are becoming more widely used. We'll talk a little bit later about which ones and how to use them. So let's think about what do we need to do. We need to have that defined goal. What is the outcome you want? Are we looking for a maternal trait animal? Are we looking for terminal? Are we looking for a carcass trait? What are we looking for? So with that said, every breed association has a table that looks very similar to this. I just pulled this one off from Angus yesterday. So this is their most updated. And you basically, if you're wanting to find them, type in the name of the breed and then EPD percentile table. So you'll see that right up here on the top, the breed and a percentile table. The next thing you need to make sure of is that we're using the right set of tables. Every breed association, for the most part, except for one or two, will have their animals broke out into parent sires, which means they've actually got progeny with calves on the ground that have been assigned to them. Parent dams, the same way. Non-parent sires or non-parent bulls and non-parent cows. And so those are going to be the virgins. Those are the calf crop from this year and last year. 2019 and 2020, since we're in 21 already. So what we do is we look at this, we look at the trait that we're interested in. If you look at the first column here in blue, you see top percentile, and then you see the next column says Cabanese direct, CPD, birth weight, weaning weight, minimum weight, residual average daily gain, dry matter intake, and so on, all the way across. Angus has a huge suite of EPDs that we can work off of. And then we look down and we look at that percentile in that first column. The best way to think about a percentile table is the top 1% is valedictorian of the class. He's the top graduate of the class for that year. And that means that there's only 1% or less of the breed that is better than that animal for that particular trait. Likewise, if we were to scroll to the end of this table, we'd see a 95th percentile. And what that means is that animal, that bull or that cow, is in the 95th percentile, which means 95% of the breed is better than he is in that trait. That's real important to keep in mind. 1% is best in most circumstances. We'll talk about this caveat where that's not necessarily true here in a little bit, but just keep in mind that 1% is typically better unless we're talking about some extremes in a few of the individual traits. We'll talk about later. So that's the way to go about judging a bull or a registered cow and getting a relative ranking of how she compares to other individuals within her breed. And that will give you a good example. All too often, somebody will send me a set of papers and they only considered birth weight. And when I look at the birth weight might be decent, but the other traits that are economically important, like weaning weight or drilling weight or marbling, docility or milk, one of those things like that, are usually pretty low, it seems like, unfortunately. And that's an uncomfortable conversation I've had to have many, many times over my career with somebody when you tell them that, hey, your bull's in the 80th percentile, 90th percentile. And so in my opinion, if the bull's in the lowest quartile, 75th percent or less, 75th percent or higher, so 75th percent to 100, question, does he really even have the right to own a pair of testicles and be reproductive and producing cattle that are going to go back in the industry? I would challenge it. Probably doesn't need to be there. So let's think about what kind of cattle we're going to produce. So we're going to say in this situation that you're a terminal operator, which means 100% of your calf crop, heifers and steers, are always going to be sold off your ranch at the end of the year. And you're going to buy back all the replacements you need to keep your operation mature cow herd at the static number that it needs to be at. So in my opinion, we need to keep our terminal performance traits. We need to think about weaning weight and yearling weights. Those are two of the things that you get paid on. Dollars per pound is how we get paid in this business, no matter when we sell. But if you're going to sell off the ranch, then I would suggest that you need to be in the top 35% or better for weaning weight and yearling weight, because you're getting paid for how many pounds of calf you can produce off your finite resource, which is that amount of grass that you're able to grow within the confines of your fencing. Likewise, if you think about maternal characteristics, then let's look at weaning weight. I want to moderate weaning weight and yearling weight just a little bit. Instead of having those top individuals, I want to be in that probably that middle half to 25th percent to 75th percentile. What I'm doing is I'm cutting out the extremes on the high end as well as the low end. We don't, and the reason is because there's a direct correlation to frame size of the cow and how big that calf is going to be. And so a big calf or a heavy weaning weight calf, a heavy yearling weight heifer is going to turn into a really big cow. And so all too often what happens is we get a producer that's keeping back replacements, and he's in the weaning pen, and he's trying to decide which heifers are going to get the cut to stay home and become cows, and which ones are the ones that are going to sell. And all too often what happens is he's just standing out there with no paperwork in front of him, and he's not giving any credence to the age of that calf. He's just looking at, she's a big calf over there, I think I'm going to keep her. Is she big because she's the oldest calf in the group, or is she big because she's out of a big cow? If she's out of a big cow challenging, you probably don't need her in your herd perpetuating those large genetics. Big cows will typically eat a lot of grass. Not always the case. We have efficient large frame cows, but in general, big cow eats a lot of grass, and we can make more money on running more moderate frame cows. Likewise, let's think about our milking ability. So in my opinion, this is where our ideal milk EPD should be for Angus, red or black. I think we need to be in that 25th to 75th percentile. Again, we want to get rid of those extremes. There are some black Angus cows out there that will give just about any Jersey or Hereford, Holstein, a run for their money on milk production. If you're out in native pasture country in the western part of the state, Oklahoma or Texas or New Mexico, it's really tough for a heavy milking cow to be able to support herself on the groceries that we give her in the pasture. Herefords aren't quite as heavy with milking, but those of y'all that are in the Hereford business or buying from Hereford breeders, I would issue caution that y'all may be getting close to approaching that point of what I call no returns or reduced diminished returns. And I'll show you a table that represents that here in a little bit. Beefmaster and Brangus, the Brahma breeds, they're not haven't been quite as excessive on their milking EPD runs that they've been doing the last 10 years. So you can be in that 1 to 50 percentile for Beefmaster, 10 to 50 on Brangus. And I'm cutting out just those extremes on the high end because there is Angus genetics in there. So I just want to keep those extremes out of keep us from having that real heavy milking cow. We think about scrotal EPD. This is if I'm going to keep replacements. If I'm a terminal operator, I really don't care about scrotal EPD, and I don't even consider it at all. But I want to be in the top 35th percentile, so 1 to 35% for scrotal EPD if I'm keeping replacement females out of the school. The only thing that is the main driver of scrotal EPD is it confers an earlier puberty of the heifer out of that bull. A lot of people think that a large testicle bull has more semen there, but they think he's going to have a heifer that's going to persist and stay in the herd a lot longer. She's going to be more fertile. Believe it or not, the heritability estimate of fertility to testicle size is actually very low. So the thing that it does confer is that we can get the heifer reach puberty at an earlier age, which is good, so we can have that heifer calving as a true 2-year-old. Speaking of calving, where do we need to be on that? let's say we think about Cavanese Direct, which is CED. Some breeds will just call it Cavanese, CE, or Cavanese Maternal, CEM. I like to be in the 50th percentile or better for both of those. But we got to remember that those two traits are antagonistic. The best way to get a high CEM, if you've got a concern about that, is a larger frame cow. A bigger frame cow is going to have a larger pelvis. It's going to be easier for her to pass out a bigger calf. The converse is true. If we have a cow that's going to be a big frame cow, more than likely it's going to start off life with a bigger birth length. And so that's going to make it very difficult to have a good Cavanese Direct score. So those two can be antagonistic. Now, not always. There's lots of times we can find some bulls out there that are curved bidders on both, and that would be what we'd like to shoot for when we think about Cavanese Maternal, Cavanese Direct. We think about our carcass characteristics. It doesn't matter, in my opinion, if we're going to be a terminal or if we're going to be a maternal herd. We're still in the beef business no matter what. We're still selling total pounds of beef, and we're want to sell a good quality product. So we need to think about being at least breed average or better for those carcass characteristics, such as marbling, back fat, ribeye rate. Now, if we're using a continental type breed for our bull, keep in mind that some folks are saying, a lot of folks out there in the industry are saying that our ribeye areas are starting to become excessive or already excessive in size. So that's where we definitely don't want to push the envelope and get those really, really high ribeye areas, especially if we're using a high continental percentage in our cow or our bull side. We've got to remember that we've got to have a product that works for all segments of the industry. Just because he works out well for you and that feed out well for the feeder, if he doesn't fit the box for the packer, and the packer has to take that rib roll and cut it down to chop it to fit the box, he's taking a reduced value on that piece of rib or that loin that he's cut off. And so we don't want to see that happen, because if that happens, he's going to roll his bid price back to the feeder, and that means the feeder has less money to pay you as the cow calf commissioner. The other thing I want you to think about is if you have a calf that puts you in a situation like these two fellows. I took this picture probably 10 years ago. It took them over 30 minutes to get this one calf to go down the alley. And those two guys spent most of their time in the positions that they're in right now. This position is heritable. So if I've got a calf that's like that, I want to think about who is his mom, who's his daddy. And more than likely, when you figure out who that calf's mama is, she's the first one that throws her head up when you come into pasture, and she heads to that tree line out there in the back. And so she's the one that's going to be, and she teaches not only her calf to be that way, but she's going to teach 5 or 6 or a dozen others to be that way as well. So we need to think about that. This position is heritable, both from the cow and the bull side. So those breeds that have a docility score, likewise, I look at that docility score and I'm going to give it credence. I'm not going to take that bull, even if he's really a pretty bull and meets all the requirements. If he has a low docility score, I really don't want him anymore. The older I get, the less I like going up the fence, and the slower I move, and the longer it takes me to heal. So keep that in mind on our bulls and our cow. In my opinion, for what it's worth, Robert Wells says, I think you should be, most commercial cattle producers should be terminally focused. And I'd say the reason is because most cattle producers have the size and scale that fits better. If you're under 200 head, realistically, maybe 150, depending on the circumstances, it's very difficult for you to pull off and be very efficient at producing your own replacement females and making a good terminally focused calf that's going to make you the most money possible. The reason is, the old saying is, jack of all trades is the master of none. If we're focused on maternal characteristics, so we don't have that cow that becomes a 1,800 pound cow, then it's hard to do and still have those really high leaning weight and yearly weight EPDs, those big ribeye scores, things of that sort. We want to moderate those maternal characteristics. The other thing you have to think about is the efficiency of your production process. If you're going to run a maternal herd and a terminal herd, That means at least during the breeding season, we've got to have 2 breeding pastures, if not more, probably more like 3. And the reason is we got to think about we've got to have the right kind of bull to breed to our heifers, and then we're going to have a different set of bulls to breed the calves out of those heifers, because we don't want those heifers being bred back to their sires. And then if we're doing everything right, and we've got a terminal focus where we're really trying to mash down the scales, then we're going to have another set of bulls for that. Otherwise, if we don't, we're going to give up some pounds in the pasture because we're not optimizing our weaning weight and ground weight piece. So you think about the productivity side of that. If you've got a set of heifers out there and you're not large enough to be able to justify having those heifers out there, you got to have 2 years worth of heifers in the pipeline, so they're not productive yet. They're still eating forage, but those heifers are costing you money because they're not bringing you a calf every day, or excuse me, every year. And you remember, you don't get a calf till 24 months of age. That means you've got to own them for at least 18 months, maybe 16 months after you could have sold her. So, think about that heifer being 6 to 8 months of age, and you get her through a weaning program and you can sell her. Realize your value of that calf right then. Otherwise, you've got to hold her for 24 months before you get a calf on the ground, and then another 6 or 8 months before you can sell that first calf. So you're at 32, 33 months of age before you get the first dollar back out of that female. And there's a real cost to time value of money, especially if you work off of interest, off of operating loans and things of that sort, because you've got a longer interval to be able to get a revenue off of that first female. So then also you have to think about that there's some tax considerations for those ranch raised replacements. And what I mean by that is if she dies, you don't get to write her off. You can write off some of the expenses it cost you to raise her, but you don't get to write her off if she dies. If you purchase a female and something happens and she dies, you get to write her off. You also get to have some depreciation on that animal. You do to get depreciation on that ranch raised calf, but it's not at the same degree. That's about as far as I'm going to go on that. I'm not an accountant, but visit with your accountant on that for the considerations of having ranch raised replacements versus purchase replacements. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the value of the known bull genetics. As I said earlier, let's think about it. Heavier calf sells for more dollars per head. That should be your goal if you're a terminal operator, is to be able to sell and maximize your total pounds of beef you can produce within the confines of your pasture space that you have available. And here's why. If we look at this graph, yes, it's a little dated, but it's very similar. If we look just at the weight of the animal, the 500-pound steers in blue, the red is 700 to 8, and then fed cattle are in that green turquoise line. Well, on first blush, it looks like we ought to be trying to sell 500 to 600 pound steers because more labor is more on a price per pound basis. But what is our checking account and what is our bank care about? We don't care about bragging rights or price per pound, but we care about what was the total dollars of that check that came from that sell bar or whenever we did sell that animal. So in that example, if we take a 550 pound calf, multiply it times about $1.70, you're going to get around $990. Likewise, we go all the way through 750 pound calves worth about $1,200 back in 2013, and that 1,250 pound calf, a feeder steer that's ready to finish, was worth about $1,750. So if I can produce, instead of a 550 pound calf coming off my ranch, if I can shift my sell date and have a heavier weight sell animal to 750 pounds, well, I've just realized about $210 a head more. If I can make that extra 200 pounds and it doesn't cost me $210 to do it, then I've made additional dollars, and my value of gain has exceeded my cost of gain. And that's where we want to be. That's realizing the most profitability off our ranch. So let's have a real world scenario here. Let's take bull number 1, and let's say it's this bull here in the picture. Kind of shallow gutted, got lots of air between the ground and the belly. We don't get paid for that air. The soup bone's not worth a lot. He's just a bull that he gets the job done. We got from our neighbor. He didn't cost us a lot to buy. We don't have any individual performance information, no EPDs, and no reliable ancestral history. The neighbor just says, yeah, yeah, his dad was a good bull. That's about all we know about it. So let's say we bought that bull for $2,500. At the end of his life, he weighs 1,850 pounds, and let's say the salvage price of the bull is 80 cents a pound. We're going to hold these prices pretty constant in this scenario so y'all can see that. So we take 80 cents a pound times 1,850, we come up with $1,465.20. And that's assuming a 1% death loss of our bulls, because I work with a bunch of economists around here that say I need to account for an occasional death loss if the bull doesn't make it to salvage. Let's say we own that bull for 5 years, so we would sell him at the end of the 7 year. He's 7 years old, we sell him, and if we depreciate that bull, that $1,465 out over that $2,500, out over the course of those 5 years, that bull's worth, his cost is about $206.96 a year. Hopefully everybody kind of follows that train of thought. So we'll carry that $206.96 cord across to the next slide, and we've got a maintenance cost of that bull. It's going to cost us to keep him on the ranch, form of forage, feed, supplementation, medicine cost, things that he tears up. So we take that 206 plus 400. So now we got it. We're into that bull for about $607 annually. Let's say we're going to give him that traditional 25 cows to get bred on an annual basis, and it's going to cost us about $24.28 on a per cow per year basis for him to expose 25 cows. So that's what it costs us to get him to get us a calf on the ground. Doesn't sound too bad. Let's switch gears and look at bull number 2. And like I said, I don't care if he's a white bull or if he's a black bull. We're going to buy him from a reputable reputation type breeder or program. We have that individual performance information, individual information, EPDs. He comes with a full suite of data. And because of that, he costs a little more. So he's about $2,000 a head more, so he's $4,500. But he's a little bigger bull at salvage time. He's about 150 pounds heavier, a little heavier muscle, a little bigger frame, just a little nicer form. We're still selling him at that 80 cents a pound. Take that 80 cents times 2,000 minus the 1% death loss. The value of that bull at salvage is worth $1,504. The cost of that bull on a per year basis on a 5 year lifespan is $500. Carry that across, then we'll look at the cash cost of that bull. Because he costs us a little more, let's say we spend $100 a year or a little bit more on taking care of him. It costs more, so let's just take a little better care of it. So we do it. So now that bull's into us for $1,083 a head per year. We give him those same 25 cows to get bred, and his cash cost per cow is at $43.33. Now let's do a direct comparison, make this easier for everybody to follow. So if we have bull 1, bull 2, here's our cash cost of what it costs to get a cow bred. For bull 1, $24.28, bull 2, $43.33. So that bull 2 costs us $19 a head more per calf than he's able to get on the ground. Doesn't sound too good, does it? We're already starting in the hole. Well, what about the value of his calves that he's producing? This data from this point forward comes from some real world data from our Integrity Beef Alliance producers that we have here at Noble. So let's look at that 520 pound weaning weight calf. That's that bull number 1. We're going to sell in October. Bull number 2 weans us a little better calf at 585 pounds. So the selling price of that first bull, because he's lighter weight, it's about $1.43. The heavier calf is going to sell a little less because he's a heavier calf at $136. The value of that number 1 bull is going to come out to $754 per calf. The value of that bull calf out of number 2 bull is $818. Let's be fair. Let's take out the additional cost of that number 1 or number 2 bull to own. So take 818 minus the 1905. So now we're down to $799 versus the adjusted value. We just bring that down for that number 1 bull, $754. So the difference is that better quality bull, even though it costs us more to buy, it gives us a calf. Every calf at weaning is worth about $44 per head more. Now, if we take that $44 per head, excuse me, and we look at it on a per number of cows that he's going to breed on an annual basis, so times that 25 cows, that better bull is worth about $1,100 more to us at the end of the first year of calf profits sold at meat. We look over at a 5 year lifespan, he's worth about $5,500 compared to that other bull that's not quite as good. We don't know as much about it. What if we take it a step further? We take them through a 60-day background program. We look at that bull number one, that calf, that background is going to be about 655 pounds. Bull number two, that calf is, he's got high performance. He's got the genetics to perform if we give him the feed available to grow. He weighs about 780 pounds. And again, those calves, those heavier calves, are going to sell for less. So we look at the value of that calf from bull number one is worth about $821. The value of that calf out of bull number two is worth about $937. Again, let's take out the cost of the higher value of that bull. And now we're about a $97 per head difference in the value of the calves after preconditioning program for that better quality bull. In the first year, we've made up $2,400 advantage on bull number two versus bull number one. Over the course of 5 years, it's about a $12,000 advantage. Folks, this is not made up numbers. These are real world numbers that we get out of our Integrity Beef Alliance that we've seen time and again, year over year, for about 20 years of running of this program. So that's real world data. So let's summarize it. Let's say you're willing to take that $2,500 that you're willing to pay for the neighbor's bull, and you're only going to sell at weaning. Well, take that additional value that bull is able to bring to you, the better bull, for $5,500. Add that to your $2,500, and your break even at weaning is about $8,000. Purchase cost of your bull before, if you get over $8,044, then you spent too much money. That bull's not going to return value back to your operation. But if you buy that bull for anything less than $8,000 and you sell it weaning, then anything difference, let's say you pay $4,000 for that bull, and that bull is going to bring back about $4,000 to the ranch more than what it cost you to buy it. What if we take him all the way to that precondition? Take that $2,500, just like we had a while ago, plus the $12,000 increased value at preconditioning when they sell there. So basically, if that book, you've got up to $14,000 you can spend on a commercial bull. Would I ever tell you to spend that much money? I'm going to say no, and I feel pretty confident in that, because even when in 2015 and 2014, when we had the run up in prices of replacements, I never had a producer that I felt comfortable telling me to spend that kind of money on a commercial bull. So in the likelihood, if you wanted to spend that kind of money on a bull, you could probably go to just about most sales in the country and buy one of their lead-off bulls in that sale, let alone one of their bulls that's just as good of a quality but is deeper in the sale catalog. So the take-home value message is there that more expensive bull that's higher quality and has the better performance traits will typically make you more money in the long run. And what I tell people is when they say, I can't afford to buy that better bull, even if you're a small operator like I am, I have to remind myself this myself, because I'm a big tightwad and I don't like writing big checks. So you can't afford not to buy that better quality bull. So Gabby, let's take a real quick break there. Do you have any questions floating around out there?
There's not any out there at the moment. So folks, if y'all have anything y'all want to ask, go ahead and send some through. We will watch for those.
Okay. And also, folks, while we have these little breaks, I'll flash up this slide here so you can get my phone number and email address. I will say that if you call, be sure to leave a message, because I have folks that call and they won't ever leave a message. I don't look at my call log and wonder whose phone number is that. So if you don't leave a message, then my opinion is that if you don't leave a message, it wasn't important, and therefore it's not important enough for me to try to figure out what it was. But leave a message. I spend a lot of time in programs like this, and even during COVID, we still are doing quite a few farm visits. Looks like there's a question that popped up, Gabby.
Yes, this one is just about the webinar itself. It's asking if it'll be available for review and when. Yes, so after this class is over with, whether you attend live or if the folks that registered and weren't able to attend, we'll be sending out the recording of this 2 days after the program. So it should go out on Thursday. And we will make sure that the correct recording is on there. We've had some issues with that email the last couple months. So Anyways, in a couple days from now, just be on the lookout from your email. We'll send that out. And then we've gotten a couple other questions that have come through. Robert is asking, will you get into any discussions on crossbreeding?
Great. I'm glad somebody asked that. And yes, if we have time, I hope to get into that here shortly. But yes, we will.
And then from Christina, she's asking me if I want to learn more about running a cattle business, where can I go? Are there books you recommend or classes?
So I would say watch the Noble website right now with COVID going on. We've pulled all of our classes off of the offering. But typically, Noble offers typically anywhere between 40 and 50 classes a year on various aspects of ranching, from raising pecan trees to fertility to cattle production, pasture management, all things in between, wildlife production. Talk to your county extension agent as well. They're a valuable resource that's in just about every county across the nation. But there are also folks like Noble, and we do go onto a national platform. So feel free to give us a holler. We have specialists that specialize in just about every aspect of ranching. And that's one of the nice things I enjoy with my job working here is I don't have to wear the all hats. So if somebody has a cattle question, I'll answer. Sheep, goat, or horse, I'm the default guy for that as well. But if you've got a pasture question or a con question or wildlife, I'll take your number and I'll get you over to the right person. And that's not my specialty. And the nice thing is here we get to concentrate on our specialization. And if you get to concentrate on your specialization, you can really hone in and be a little better.
Yes, I agree with that. And Christina, you're already doing it. You're attending today, so you're taking one step forward. Keep finding programs like this. We offer this monthly, and like you said, ours are virtual for a little while, but we do usually host in person in Fort Worth, and we're going to start again trying to get this out on the road if we can. We have some new people coming in that are going to try to help with that. So just keep plugged into Extension and these kind of programs. That'll be a good start.
Yeah, if there's any one good thing that you can say ever came out of COVID is it's really forced the agriculture industry and the knowledge providers like us or Extension to get out of our comfort zones and to get on the internet. So there's so many programs nowadays that are being hosted just about any day you can find some sort of ranch related program that's being hosted on the internet.
And we have a question from Sydney. How do you manage bull costs as a small producer, less than 40 acres? Obviously, heifers need to be sold prior to the breeding age.
So great question. How do we manage bull costs on a small operation? That's always a tough one. I tell people that I don't even consider artificial insemination until we're in a multiple bull battery. Like it or not, bull is a necessary evil to the program. So it's just a matter of trying to find a bull that meets your goals and your standards. If you're a small operator like that, you don't even want to think about replacement females. So you want to find a good source that's going to be able to develop a good female. And you want to buy a bred heifer. You don't want to buy a heifer at weaning because that's just trading tick for tack there. So you want to buy a bred heifer that is going to be calving within 4 to 6 months after purchase. How to manage those costs. One of the biggest things I tell everybody is when you're in your bull search, start early. It's cheaper to buy a bull in the fall, bring him into your operation and wintering through the winter, and get him used to your operation and the management you're going to make him work in and the environment he has to work in. Even if you're a small operator like that, hopefully all your cows are bred at that time. I'm a small operator, so I run my bull with my cows up until when that first calf hits the ground. When that first calf hits the ground, I circle a day on my calendar and I say, okay, I've got 3 weeks before I need to move him out. And then I'll put him in another pasture. He only has to stay in that other pasture. Actually, what I'll do is I'll move that heifer and that calf out and let him stay with my bred calves. Now, in doing a situation like that, you have to be pretty rigid. And if you get a cow that calves a little late, then you need to move her out of your program because she's not going to get any better every year thereafter. So you got to be kind of brutal in your culling process to do that, but you can make that work in a small operation.
Okay, and we have one last question from Pam McPeck. Can you make some comments about economics for small operators, less than 25 head, using AI rather than owning the bull?
Okay, so as I just said, AI versus owning a bull on a small operation with less than 25 head, really hard to justify artificial insemination in a commercial herd. If you're a purebred herd, you've got completely different goals than a commercial operator. But if you're in a commercial herd, you still have to have that bull, so you've got to own him anyways. So the main thing that you're doing with AI is there's two things. One, you're grouping up your cows so that they calve in a tighter time frame, and you're using better genetics than what you can buy through the bull that you have to own in flesh. Unless the bulls that you can afford to buy are pretty low quality, and as I said earlier, if you start early and are willing to go to multiple cells, you can typically find the quality bull you're looking for at a reasonable price. The worst thing you can do is lock yourself into, I'm going to go to this cell and this cell only, and that's where I'm going to buy my bull, because then you paint yourself in the corner. But if you start early in the fall, start looking early, and for a spring calving herd, you've got time, you'll find the right bull. If you want to use group your cows up, you don't necessarily have to AI. You can do some things just with ester synchronization, feed MGA, which is pretty low cost. That'll help group your cows into a tighter calving window. But for a single bull operation, commercial herd, it's pretty tough to justify AI from an expense standpoint.
We have a couple more questions, but do you want me to pause them for a minute and go on?
Yeah, I was going to say, if we could, if not, we'll never get to the crossbreeding, and that's the very last segment. I know somebody's already asked, and that's a one I'd really like to get everybody to.
Okay, go ahead on that part. We'll do it.
Okay, all right. So let's switch gears and talk about what's the ideal cow. And again, I've got this silhouette here because I really don't care what breed she is or what color, as long as she works for you and you're happy with her. But I want you to, as I said earlier, I want you to start with the goal in sight. Start at the end and then work your way backwards. Now, with that said, everybody probably would like to have this nice new truck. That's a 2021 Ford F-350. If you're a Dodge or Chevy fan, just imagine that Dodge or Chevy sitting there. But everybody would like to have that nice crew cab, four-wheel drive dually sitting in the driveway that somebody else paid for. I don't really want the house payment that goes with it. But the point of the fact is, what I want you to think about is when you go buy your next new vehicle, you don't go to the junkyard to buy it. Because if you go to the junkyard to buy that next new vehicle, what are you buying? You're buying somebody else's wreck. It's all right. They've already been there, done that, run it through the ringer. So likewise, when you go to buy your next replacement female, there's a lot of folks that do this. And since we're on the internet, you can raise your hand if you want to and say, pat yourself on the back or point your finger at yourself and say, why am I doing this? Why do you go to the local weekly cattle auction and buy a replacement out of that? If she's not good enough to be a replacement for somebody else, why is she good enough to be your replacement? Now, if you're going to a local sale barn and they've got a production cell where somebody's renting the facility for the day, or you're at that local sale barn and the auctioneer says, hey, Rancher Joe is getting out of the business. He and his wife had a big fight and they're splitting up. Or he's 90 years old and he's decided he's ready to hang up the ranch. That's a little different. But if you're going through that local sale barn and that cow's running or that heifer's running through there in a single or one or two groups, and you're buying her, she's somebody else's problem. I really question how serious are you about being in your business. So with that said, a lot of people ask me, what's the ideal cow? And so I put a lot of thought in this. To me, an ideal cow, she has early puberty because I want her to calve at a true 2 years of age. So that way I can keep her in my system starting off right. She never misses a breeding season. So at least one calf for every year. And I say at least because hopefully every now and then she'll give me a set of twins and she'll raise those twins up successfully with no problems. I've got to have her calve unassisted. I work from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7, 8 o'clock a lot of nights at my day job in town. And so my cows have got to be able to do it on their own. If they don't, they're going to be in trouble. I don't want her to require a lot of supplemental feed. She's got to do it and be easy keeping and and be pretty nice about it at the same time. Likewise, if she doesn't require a lot of supplemental feed, she ought to be easy fleshing so she maintains her body condition score. I want her to convert forage to pounds of raised calf, and I want her to do and give me the biggest calf possible. Two ways she can give me the biggest calf. One is being the earlier calver in my calving window, and then number two, having the genetic capacity to raise a big calf. One, through sufficient milk, but not too much, and also number two, for the genetics for that calf to be able to excel in the growth traits. I want her to stay in the herd a long time. How often is it we talk to people and everybody starts thinking, well, she's a 10-year-old, we need to start thinking about rotating her out. She's only given us 8 calves at that age. I would rather see her get to where she's giving me 10, 12, 13 calves before she moves out of the herd. That's a hard question to answer. When is the right time to get rid of my cow? And as one of our seasoned economists here said, well, it's easy to see it in hindsight. It was the year before she missed her first calf. But looking at it from a proactive standpoint, that's a lot harder to figure out. She's got to stay in the herd a long time. She better be nice doing it. I'm 50 years old this year. I don't really get up fences as well as I used to, and I don't bounce as good as I used to when I hit the ground. She's got to be good muscling. I want her to have a muscle score number 1. I want her to have good carcass characteristics because I want the guy that buys my calves to be successful, and I want him to come back and bid top dollar when he sees my cow coming through the ring next time. And even if you sell at the local sale barn, you think you're anonymous, trust me, you're not. Little story to that is I sold a set of cattle for my wife's father-in-law, and we thought he had passed away, and we were helping clean up the ranch. We sent a set of calves over there that were wild as deer in eastern Oklahoma. They see a lot of wild cattle over there. I told them they were wild. The guy was like, yeah, we hear that. 3 weeks later, I brought in another trailer. Another guy checked me in. I gave him the ranch name, and he looked at me and says, did you have some cattle in here 3 weeks ago? And I said, I'd never met that guy before, but he knew that ranch name because the cattle were that wild. So you're not as anonymous as you think. As I said earlier, I want them to milk, but not too much milk. And above all, I want them to look good doing all these things. Because I want to put them in the front pasture. I want to have a little bit of pride and ownership. If my neighbors drive by, I want them to look at those cows and say, you know that Robert Wells? He's doing it right. He knows what he's doing after all. And I want you to remember that you're in the business of producing beef. If you have 1 cow or 1,000 cows, you're in the business of producing beef. And so think about that. Think about when we look at a picture like this, of where the different cuts come from and what that's going to translate into the value of that cow. So as I said earlier, on that bull, in my opinion, the ideal cow, we want to think about that rectangular box. And I want it to be as tall and deep and as wide and as long as possible. So easy flesh. I like these cows here. You look at them, yeah, they're standing in knee-deep grass, but look at them. They're just greasy fat. And they got calves out there behind them at their side. Those are pretty good-sized calves. So these cows are able to do it and get it done pretty easily. And docility. You know, how many of y'all can take a newborn calf and plug them onto the cow out in the middle of the pasture and not have her in a chute? I'll tell you, I've got a cow that's her numbers on my short list because she rolled me last year and worked me over pretty good when I was trying to tag her brand newborn calf. I definitely could not have done what this young man's doing in this photograph. So docility does matter. As I said a while ago, when we think about our cows, if we have the ability to purchase heifers that are out of known genetics, we want to moderate our performance EPDs. As I said earlier, weaning weight and yearling weight. Moderate that yearling weight and mature height, or yearling and mature heights, as well as mature weights. Most of the major mainstream breed associations now are collecting mature weight and mature height, or at least one of those two. Really pay attention to that if you're going to be in the replacement business and you're going to have females, because we need to moderate our cow herd. You think back, the beef industry is an industry of cycles. In the late 1800s, if you look at the photographs, the drawings back from then, we had some monster cows out there. 1,800, 2,000 pound cow was not unheard of in the late 1800s. And then the message got out there, we need to make them smaller. So over the course of 30, 40 years, We get into the 1940s and 1950s. What do we wind up with? We wind up with little critters like this little guy on the right-hand side. He's belt buckle cattle. And then we said, oh gosh, we overshot the runway. Let's make them bigger. I mean, y'all were in high school or junior high or show cattle age in the 80s and 90s. I was in the 80s and the late 70s, and we had giraffes. I've got some photographs that are sitting on the wall of my mom's house of my show cattle, and there's some places that you can only tell who's there in the background based upon what cap or hat they're wearing. You can't even see their faces because the cattle got so big. And now we've told everybody, hey, let's monitor. And so we got to be careful. We're good about taking instruction, but we're really bad about overshooting the runway. So look at those mature weights and mature heights of the animals that are coming out. Again, have that high scrotal EPD to get further puberty of the heifer. Cavities direct and cavities maternal, as I said earlier, antagonistic. Think about your breed averages for all your carcass characteristics for those females. Moderate that milk score. As I said earlier, there's some of the Angus cattle out there, and even some of the red Angus or black Angus, and even Hereford now is starting to approach that point of diminishing returns when we think about milking ability. Udder score. Several breed associations are starting to include udder scores in their EPDs. So think about that when you're using those bulls. Look at the udder score of the bull because that will translate into the heifer. We want to have those teats to be the right size and the right uniformity. We don't want extra teats there. We want that bag to last a long time. We don't want her to look like this after 5 or 6 years of being in production. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about that cow size as I've already mentioned. So think about the cow, as I said earlier, she's got to match the environment that she's working on. So what is that environment? In my mind, the environment is multiple factors. Climate, management, forage-based, terrain, pasture size, and distance to water. All those things factor in to how successful that cow can be. In addition to that, in making her be functional in my environment, cow size and milk production are two key portions there. We've already talked about that a little bit, but I'm going to go in depth now. So let's look at the nutrient requirements of a cow. And we're going to compare a 1,100-pound cow versus a 1,300 pound. So all the data below on the table for 1,100-pound cow will be in yellow. The data for that 1,300-pound cow will be in black. And this data is developed out of the nutritional NRC requirements for beef cattle. So that's the nutritional guide that we go off of as nutritionists. So in every instance, if we look at that 1,100-pound cow, she's going to consume less total feed from calving to breeding, breeding to weaning, weaning to last third, and then the last trimester. And so every instance, she's going to eat less. If we look at total pounds of protein and total pounds of energy that she needs, in every instance, she requires less protein and less energy to get the job done. That's solely based upon her mature weight. So if we look at those different intervals, we see that lighter cow, only 200 pounds difference, is anywhere from 10 to 13% more efficient in utilization of forage, or the requirement of utilization of forage. Now this slide here looks like a shotgun scatter plot. This is some data that I got from Dave Lawman at Oklahoma State University, in which they plotted cow weight on the bottom axis, the x-axis, versus the calf weaning weight on the left, or the y-axis. And what they found was, over time, was for every increase of 100 pounds of cow weight, they saw about a 6-pound return in weaning weight. When they looked at the historical data, Urich and co-workers in 1971 found that relationship for every 100 pound increase in cow weight resulted in about 4.2 pounds of weaning weight. Camp Maurer at Oklahoma State reproduced that study in 2010. Our genetics have gotten a little better, so we were seeing about 6.4 pounds of increased weaning weight for every 100 pounds. And then Dobbs in 2011 at Oklahoma State did the same study, and they got about 6. So when we took all the data, melded it together, we're seeing about 6.07 pounds of increased weaning weight for every 100-pound increase in cow weight. Well, that sounds fine, doesn't it? It sounds like, well, hey, I'm getting a little bigger calf out of a bigger cow. Well, let's look at the cost of that, the value of gain. So what value of gain is that's what for every increased pound over the set that we want to start with, our baseline, what is it worth to us? So if the calf is worth 80 cents a pound more, or a dollar 20, how's that rate up to us? So the value of that income on a dollars per hundredweight basis, that 80 cent value gain, and that's where we're at. We're going to be usually between 80 cents and a dollar a pound on value gain. And that's the incremental increase in value of that heavier weight calf. So at 80 cents, that calf is worth to us another $4.86 per hundredweight. At a dollar, value gain is only worth about $6 per hundredweight. That sounds okay. So we start thinking about what's it going to cost us to produce that. The data from Damona Doi and Dave Lawman at Oklahoma State University estimated the annual increased cost for that bigger cow, for every 100 pounds larger she is about $42 per hundredweight more. So if we take that cow from a 1,200 pound cow to a 1,300 pound cow, it's going to cost us about $42 more to keep her around. And she eats more forage, she requires more supplementation. On those products, veterinary products that we have to give that are dose titrated, like dewormer or antibiotics, we have to supply her with more of those. As well as we can only have so many cows out there in a pasture. And a larger cow, we've got to offset and reduce our pasture carrying rates to be able to still not run out of forage. And so it costs us that extra $42. So for every 100 pound increase in additional cow weight body weight results in about 6 pounds increase in weaning weight. Now, if you really want to push weaning weight, probably a more efficient way to do it is for every 1 pound increase in birth weight results in about 2 pound increase in weaning weight. So that's a 2-to-1 return instead of a 6-to-1. Now, how ludicrous is that? How many people want to really push their birth weights just to get a little bit heavier weaning calf? As I said earlier, my goal is for that cow to calve unassisted. So the response determined for that 6 pounds of additional weight off of a 100 pound heavy cow, the value of that is only about 11 to 17% of that needed to break even to offset that cost of the larger cow. That just doesn't work. So let's look at a real world scenario. Let's say we have a 500 acre property, 350 of it's grazing. That 350 has no brush, there's no ponds. That's what cows can actually put their feet on and potentially graze. Let's say forage production there is good to average, and so we produce about 2,300 pounds to the acre. That's going to be equivalent to about 115 pounds to the acre inch of forage. So if you've got a yardstick and you go out there and you measure your grass, and it's this many inches times this, and it's this particular density, you take that inches times the density, and you can get your total pounds of acre forage produced. Our range and pasture guys around here will tell you that they say we should target 25% utilization of the pasture. We take half and leave half, but we also got to leave some there for the grass to regrow. And then when we look at it, we got cows are going to lay on it, going to defecate, urinate on it, so they're not getting 100% of that half that they're eating. They're only getting about 25%. But I'm a livestock guy, and I'm going to push the envelope a little bit, so I'm going to say 30% utilization. So I have 2,300 pounds on an acre basis. I only got about 690 I can put in a cow, and that she can do something. Sorry about that. So that gives us, on a dry matter basis, we got about 550 pounds of dry matter. Because remember, this is edible forage. We got nutritionists. We like to take the water out and put everything on an equal basis. And that's how we calculate everything on a dry matter basis. So we have 550 pounds of dry matter per acre. There's 350 acres we can graze. So this pasture has 192,500 pounds of available forage out there for the cows to consume. So if I have an 1,100 pound cow, she's going to consume about 26.4 pounds a day, or about 9,600 pounds of forage a year. So you take that math, 9,600 divided by the 192,500, and that gives me about 20 1,100 pound cows I can run on that same pasture. Likewise, if we jump her up to a 1,300 pound cow, go through the same math, we've got about 10,600 pounds of requirements, forage requirements on an annual basis. Divide that into that 192.50 or 192.500, and I can run 18 1,300 pound cows without having to put additional forage out there. Similarly, 1,500 pound cow, we can run 14 of those 1,500 pound cows. And you say, okay, Robert, what difference does that make? Bigger cow is going to give me a bigger calf. The goal is to have a cow that weans 50% of my cow weight. So let's look at that. So let's say we start off with that 1,100-pound cow, which is a pretty good, reasonable sized cow to have. And let's say she weans off a calf at 50% of her weight. It's easier for a lighter weight cow to do that than a heavier cow. So we'll just start as that as our baseline. So if she weans a calf that's 550 pounds, I can put 20 cows on this pasture, and we're going to assume 100% conception rate across all these different cows. In doing that, I'll get 11,000 pounds of sellable weaned calf out of those 20 550-pound calves out of that 1,100-pound cow. Do the math all the way across. 1,300-pound cow, I can only put 18 out there, assume 100% calf crop. 18 times 562. And the reason it's 562 is for every 600 or for every 100-pound increase in the cow, I'm increasing the calf weaning weight by 6 pounds. So I increase the cow weight by 200. I increase the calf weight by 12. So now I got about 10,116 pounds of sellable calves out of that same pasture. I'll move all the way to a 1,500-pound cow, use the same math, the same reasoning there. Now I'm down to 8,000 pounds. So yeah, I've got a bigger cow out there, but more than likely she's not producing me a much bigger calf. We went 400 pounds from 1,100 to 1,500. The calf size, everything else stays equal in this scenario. The calf size only increased by 24 pounds. We've actually lost and have less sellable number of pounds of calves, 3,000 pounds less specifically, compared to for that 1,100 pound versus that 1,500 pound. So that 1,100 pound cow will give us more pounds of weaned calf to sell. So that's covering the cow size. What about milk production? Increased milk production equals increased feed for maintenance and increased feed for milk. Well, most people understand that if I got more milk coming out, it's going to require more groceries going in. The flip side of that is during that off season when she's not lactating, it costs us more to maintain that body mass that's there. You know, that it's like having a factory, and if that factory's running full gin, not in COVID time, there's a baseline cost to having that factory there. If we're in COVID time, so to speak, I thought I'd never use this as a scenario in cattle production, but if we're in times of COVID and we send everybody home from the factory, that factory, they still got the lights on, they still got utility bills, they still got all those things. There's insurance costs. All those things are fixed costs if they're using that building or not. Same thing with the cow that's lactating. There's going to be a fixed cost of maintenance if she's lactating or not. If she's got a bigger factory there in the form of an udder, then her maintenance requirements are going to be slightly larger. So let's take that 1,100-pound cow, look at an average milking cow versus a heavy milking, or what NRC calls a superior milking cow. And again, the average is going to be in yellow. The black is going to be the superior. And if we look at the weights, the amount of pounds of feed that she's going to require on a daily basis, that average milking cow is going to be much less than that heavy milking cow. Now, when we look at weaning to the end of last trimester, the study that they used didn't have any data there, but we know that there is a difference in total dry matter of that heavier milking cow versus lighter. Also, we know when we look back at protein and energy, we see the same trends that lighter milking cow requires less protein and less energy to be able to provide the milk for these calves. Now remember, there's a balance there that we need to maintain. We don't want to have a cow that lactates so little that that calf doesn't get enough groceries to be able to support his genetic potential for growth. But on the flip side, we don't need to have a dairy cow out there, especially if we're on native grass pasture situation. So in this scenario, you look at that lighter milking cow, she's going to have about a 10% reduction in dry matter requirements from calving to breeding, and about a 7% reduction from breeding to breeding time. Now, as I said earlier, I was going to show you how some of the different breeds are really kind of taking off. This is the genetic trend for several different breeds for milk, and looking at the non-parent EPD status. Now, one thing before we get too far into this, I want you to remember that this is not adjusted for breed. This is just their EPD based upon what their numbers have been from 1990 until 2020. Now, I don't want you to get in the trap of comparing those numbers directly from Angus to a Hereford to a Red Angus and so on. But what you can compare is the trend lines. And so if you look at the three British breeds there, the Angus and the Hereford Red Angus, their trend lines for milk production have gotten really steep. In the last 30 years, they have tripled their milking ability. That's probably a little excessive. You look at the Brahma influence breeds there, the Angus and Beefmaster, and they've held pretty constant. Even the continental breeds are starting to come up, but I think they're starting to get the message that too much milk can be a bad thing. So keep this in mind when you're looking at your cattle. We want them to be sufficient milkers, but we don't need to be that extreme heavy. The cow needs to fit her environment. And what I mean by that is this is a pretty neat little table that was developed several years back for western part of the states, but it works for here as well, the concept. On the right-hand side, we have the milking ability of the cow from a low milking ability up to a high milking ability. As we increase the ability of that cow to milk, we also increase our risk for management and the cost to keep her around. Likewise, we look on the left side of this table, we see the weight of the cow going from small to large. As we go from small to large, we do the same thing. We increase the risk, the management, the cost. In the middle here is rainfall. Now, I'm sure most of y'all, especially folks out in East Texas, would look at this and say, wow, well, that's pretty easy for me to have over 18 inches of rainfall on an annual basis. So not necessarily. What we need to look at is we need to look at effective rainfall. Effective rainfall is how much rain actually makes it into the soil. We get these big deluge rains where we get 2 or 3 inches in a day. How much of that rain actually made it into the soil and how much of that ran off? We're only concerned about the rain that got into the soil because the stuff that ran off may be good to fill up ponds and streams and rivers and lakes and such, but it really doesn't do you, the cattle producer, any good for your grasses because it ran off. So when you start thinking about how many total inches of effective rainfall you have, it's usually dramatically reduced from it. So look at where that band falls. I'll challenge you to start calculating what is effective rainfall. And in most situations, if you're in a situation where you've got some bare ground or not very good forage cover, probably anything over a ½ inch is not effective. If you've got good forage cover, it might be a 3/4 of an inch per day that would be effective. So kind of look at your rainfall historical records, and those days that you have excess of that ½ inch or 3/4 inch, just figure the rest of it doesn't matter. And start seeing what your annual effective rainfall is. It'll be surprising that it'll be a lot less than you think. Weaning the calf is 5 times more important than growth. And that cow's ability to wean a calf or her reproductive performance is directly related to how well she fits in the environment. So with that, Gabby, let's take another break and see if we got some questions.
Okay, yeah, we have one that's been sitting over on the chat side for a little while. It says, I'm a small producer in East Texas at 18 to 20 calves per year. I tried Net Bio, but still seems a lot of trouble for a small premium. Any additional suggestions to maximize profits?
So that's a great question. That's a question I get a lot. And I would say stick with those branded cells. If NetBio doesn't seem to be working for you, there are others out there. NetBio is a good program. But if it just doesn't fit your management philosophy or your expectation of revenue, then one of two things. Either your expectation is not realistic or maybe it's not the right program for you. Those branded programs, as we move forward, are going to become more and more important to the industry and more prominent. We think about our customer. Who is our customer? It's that housewife or that suburban person who's eating our beef. They want to know, they're okay eating beef, but they want to know a couple things. Did we manage that beef, that calf, properly while he was on our ranch? Did that animal live a good life? And did he have good animal welfare practices applied to him? Was he healthy? Was he provided for in health and nutrition and his well-being in general? These branded programs are going to be where that story is told. So there's also another program. It's one that it's called Integrity Beef. that Noble supports. You can go to integritybeef.org and look into that program, or feel free to give me a holler. I wear a couple hats here, and one of those hats is I administrate that program. But that's another program that has been able to reap the benefits of rewards of increased premiums over the years. As we move forward, all these programs are seeing lower premiums because there's becoming more people out there doing things. And the natural progression of our business, things start as a premium, then they become an expectation, and then once it becomes an expectation, if you're not doing it, then we start talking about discounts. And so that works throughout history. So things that we once got paid premiums for, think about it. Used to, you could send a horned bull to town and nobody cared. Now you send a horned bull to town, and what happens? You get knocked pretty hard. So the expectation is you're going to send a polled steer to town. So we've got to think about those things, and there's programs out there that can help you realize the value. But in order to do that, you're going to have to do a little bit extra bookkeeping, record keeping, and you're going to have to put a little extra into it. But you're typically, what I see is you get rewarded well for those efforts.
Okay. Any suggestions on adding weight to a 14-month bull inexpensively? Should he be given a lot of feed ahead of breeding season?
So I want my young bulls to go into breeding season in a body condition score 6. The saying that I use is I want him, when he meets the girls for the first time, I want him to be wearing his Sunday best, because when he comes out of that breeding pasture, he's going to be wearing his working clothes. And so he needs to have some condition on him, because there's also another saying that before bulls go into the breeding pasture, their mind is on grass. And when they go into the breeding pasture, their mind goes on to something that rhymes with grass. And they'll be chasing the cow, and they won't be eating as much, and they'll work themselves down. So how to do it economically, it just depends on where you're at. Alfalfa is a lot of times a good supplement that can be bought reasonably priced. You can use some feed substances. Byproducts typically work real well. But the last thing I want to do is put a bull in a small pen, coop him up, and just kind of fatten him out. That bull's got to be an athlete if he's going to go out there and mount multiple cows every day and get the job done. So I want to have him in a big enough pasture where he can move around, stretch his legs, and get the condition to be able to get the job done. But I want him in a body condition score 6 to start with.
Okay. We have a couple questions about milking ability, so I'll see if we can combine them together. The first one being, why is the Hereford milking ability diminishing? And the second part being, do cows with small udders produce enough milk?
So actually, if you look at that genetic trend table from earlier, Hereford milking ability has dramatically increased over the years. They've always had that reputation of being light milkers, and they were historically. But you think about the turn of the century when all of our grandpas that were in the business were all using Herefords. They were raising Herefords out there on pretty marginal ground out in the west and up north. And so you don't want a heavy milking cow in that environment. But if you look at the last 30-year genetic trends of Herefords, their milking ability has increased threefold. So that's why I give that cautionary tale. Be careful. You can overshoot the runway. They're not quite there yet, but if they keep going on the same trend line, they'll get there eventually. So they've got to be careful on that. A cow that has a small udder, can she produce enough milk? You got to remember, a calf doesn't go and get 1 or 2 meals a day. He's going to get multiple meals throughout the day. Unless she's a really, really tight uddered female, more than likely the calf will get enough milk. You got to also think that the lactation curve reaches maximal about 2 to 3 months of age for the calf. And then after that, the lactation curve starts to taper off. During that same time frame, what happens? Those calves, we usually see them out there in the pasture. They're starting to nibble and graze, and they'll be out there eating alongside the cow. So yes, a tight-uddered cow can still provide enough milk to a cow, unless, of course, she's excessive. There's always those extremes. I'd rather see a tight-uddered cow than a cow that's too wasty and produces too much milk, because that just breaks down the suspensory ligament of the udder. And we get those cows, we've all seen them when those udders and those teats are they're below or hocks. And that causes problems for the calves. Calves instinctively look along the underline of the cow when they first get up to nurse. And if she's got such a big udder that that teat is hanging way low, or that teat is bigger than what that calf can wrap his mouth around, we're going to have problems.
Can you elaborate on MGA feed supplement? It's the first time that one of our participants has heard of MGA.
So MGA is melangestrol acetate. It is a feed product that we can put in the feed that will moderate the estrus cycle. And so what it does is it actually will help stop the estrus cycle while we're feeding it. So typically you'll feed it in the feed for 14, maybe up to 21 days, using that time frame. And what you're doing is by doing that, you're stopping everybody's cycle, no matter where they're at in the cycle. And then when you stop feeding, then it starts back up and it kind of groups them all back together at the same time. If you want to do something like that, work with your veterinarian, work with a nutritionist in order to get the right doses in there, and that you're doing it at the right opportunity.
How important is it that I select cows that will self-wean? If rain and grass is good on my small operation, I may want to hold a wean calf for weight gain past initial weaning.
And the last part again for me, Gabby. How important is it for a cow to self-wean and what?
And then it says, if rain and grass is good on my operation, I may want to hold a weaned calf for weight gain past the initial weaning.
So most cows, I'll start off, that's kind of a two-part question. Most cows will self-wean, but usually they'll self-wean about the time that the second calf gets ready to hit the ground. So we don't really want that. If we leave Mother Nature up to her devices, cow wouldn't calve every year more than likely. And she's going to let that calf to stay on there for a much longer time frame than what's feasible or economical in our modern production practices. After we wean that calf, yes, if we can put him off to the side somewhere in another pasture, we can provide him with a little supplemental nutrition, because even at weaning, that calf is probably not getting enough nutrition out of the milk to support the growth potential that calf has. Because the lactation curve has dropped dramatically, and the quality of the forage out there probably is not sufficient enough to be able to sustain their milking ability or their growth ability off of the pasture. So I would definitely think about keeping the calf weaned, getting them weaned at an appropriate time, and then provide them with a little bit of supplemental nutrition. If that's in the form of feed, or if it's in the form of cover crops, some sort of winter annuals or something like that, that's a higher quality fish. Yes.
Okay, there's one that's kind of a complex one on here. How does a commercial breeder evaluate the EPDs of their herd in order to know what EPDs they need in a prospective bull they want to buy, especially if they intend to keep the replacements? Most commercial rangers don't know the EPD background of replacements that are available.
Okay, so I would start off first off, in order for you to know what you want to have, you've got to keep records. If you're not keeping records, the old saying is you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's never so more true than it is in the beef cattle business. So I would challenge, do you know your weaning weights? Do you know your mature cow size? Do you know your average body condition score of your cows? Do you know the average age of your cows and the weight of those cows at different ages, and the weight of the weaning weight of those calves of the cows at different ages? If you don't know that, it's hard to really be able to start making adjustments from there. There's also an old saying that says, buy your replacements from somebody that manages them similar or worse than you do. Now, that's a tricky statement, because I don't want you to go to somebody that's just a wreck at managing their cattle. But what I mean by that is, if go to buy your cattle from somebody that's more extensive in management than you are. They apply less management in the form of inputs than you do. Because if that's the case, or similar to what you do, because that way the cattle will have an ability to thrive. The last thing you want to do is go buy a replacement from somebody that babies and coddles their cows, and you're expecting them to make a living out on native range on big pasture country. That cow you're setting her, she's never been in that situation. She's used to having everything kind of spoon fed to her, and you're going to make her go out and work, and she's going to think her throat's going to slip. So make sure you buy one from somebody that's managing in a very similar management or more extensively than you do. Now, with that said, once you have that information, how do you identify those? You've got to interview the potential sellers. You're going to find a lot of frogs before you find the prince, so to speak. There's going to be a lot of those potential sellers that maybe aren't keeping the records up to par, that you can feel confident in what they're doing. But there are those guys out there, and a lot of them are going to come from purebred operations that run a commercial herd right beside their register. And the other thing you can do is find a reputable purebred breeder in the breed that you want, or if it's a composite breed, in that one of those composite, one of the breeds that makes up that composite, and talk to him and find out who are his buyers that he thinks are doing it right. Because they know a lot of folks, because they're selling a lot of bulls and a lot of cows. And then find that reputation breeder back.
Any general comments on the Wagyu breed? I think you get asked that like every time we do this topic.
Say that again. Any general comments on what?
About Wagyu.
Wagyu. So I'm going to save that because we're getting ready to talk about that.
Okay. And then the last one that's in here is what should we be doing before breeding season in the way of minerals and supplements to increase the likelihood that cows will breed?
So minerals are important year round, not just before or during breeding season. But if we think about spermatogenesis in our bulls, spermatogenesis, or the development of sperm, is a 60-day process. So if we think about right now, we're mid-January, we're not too far out from what we're doing right now is going to impact how that bull can have success, reproductive success at turnout. So 60 days from now, we're affecting what his sperm is going to be, the quality of his sperm from here on. So we need to have good quality mineral out there. What is good quality mineral? It needs to be a well-balanced mineral based upon the forages that you have available for them in your pasture. So get with a nutritionist to find out what the quality of the forages are in your area. Or worst comes to worst, you can always go in there, take some grab samples, try to mimic what you think cows are eating, and send it off for a mineral content analysis. Now, I typically don't adjust mineral on a month-to-month basis. Typically, I look at it more long-term, seasonally or maybe quarterly at the nearest range. But what does that mineral have in it? I want it to have more sulfates, more chelates in there, more amino acid type minerals based in there, because those are going to be more bioavailable for the cow as well as the bull.
Do you have time for any more questions, or you want to cover one more thing before?
Let's go ahead and keep going. We've got 2 more segments that we can cover. So, what is the perfect breed? That's another question I get asked all the time, and I want to tell you that to me there is no perfect breed. It just depends upon, to get back to what your goals are. What are things you should consider? Types, heterosis is huge in my opinion. The complementarity effects. What are your marketing goals? And then the last thing we'll cover in this segment will be, where do we buy our cattle? So we need to think about, in the cattle business, we've got 2 species of cattle that we work off of. We have Bos Taurus, which is our British breeds, Angus, Hereford, Shorthorn, breeds of that sort. We've got our continental breeds, our Charolais, Simmental, Limousin, Gelbies, those types. Those all fall under Bos Taurus. Then we have our Bos Indicus type cattle, and those are kind of the Zebus, or what we all kind of classify as the humped cattle. The Brahmins, the Nalors, the Gyrs, the Gezerats. They're all typically, that humped animal that come from the tropical climates of the world. And why is that important? Because if we start talking about, here in a little bit, we start talking about heterosis. Maximal heterosis is going to be exhibited when we can have outcrosses between Bos Taurus and Bos Indicus cattle. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Before we do, let's talk about some of the breeds of cattle out there. Now, we could talk all day long about all the different breeds out there. There's a great resource called Oklahoma State University Library of Breeds, I believe the name of it is, and they list just about every potential possible breed in the world. There are breeds there that I promise you, you've never heard of. So if you ever get tired one night or you can't get to sleep, go to there and it's great reading material. It's not boring, at least for me it's not, but it's sure informative. You can read about all sorts of different breeds that are out there. But when we think about British breeds in the United States, these are probably the three predominant breeds that come to mind. Black Angus, the Red Angus, the Herefords. We could throw Shorthorn in there as well, but when we look at the registration numbers, they're still not as high as these three breeds here together. Their reputation is going to be for carcass, maternal characteristics, and you notice I got growth in italics with question marks. In my opinion, these breeds were not and should not be a growth breed. You know, they should concentrate on the carcass and the maternal characteristics. When we start thinking about growth, the way we get a breed that is normally known for carcass and maternal or something else, and we start kind of forcing them to do something that they weren't really designed to do, we do that through inbreeding or line breeding. There's an old animal scientist joke. What's the difference between line breeding and inbreeding? Line breeding, it works. Inbreeding, it didn't. And so if we start forcing these cattle to do things that they weren't originally designed to do, that's when we start messing them up and we start getting into genetic mutations, things of that sort. So in my opinion, I don't look at these three breeds to provide huge amounts of growth. If I want to do growth, I'm going to cross them with another breed to bring that into the equation. So when I think about that, you know, we think about the continental breeds. Those are typically the growth breeds. They also have some maternal characteristics. They can be, some of these breeds are dual purpose, milking and growth, but we typically think of these continentals as larger framed animals. The Simmental, the Limousins, the Charolais, the Gelfies. Now, with that said, the reason I say maybe when we go back a slide and we look at that question mark on growth, right now, when we look at the current purebred breed data that's out there, the average Angus cow actually weighs more than the average Charolais cow. And in my opinion, that is inherently wrong. A Charolais cow is supposed to be a large framed, heavy muscled, high growth individual. An Angus cow is meant to be a more moderate framed animal. And so when we get an Angus cow that on average, registration information provides that the average Angus cow outweighs the average Charolais cow. And Charolais haven't gotten much smaller. They've moderated to an extent, but they haven't gotten that much smaller. That means to me that maybe that we kind of overshot the runway and tried to push growth too much in certain breeds. So that's something to think about as you look at your crossbreeding programs. Now we think about the Bos Indicus. The one that comes to mind for me at least is the American Brahma. There's also the Zebus that are out there. But we think about them, we think about maternal characteristics, great mamas, do a good job of bringing the calf to the weaning pen. She's going to be, you know, typically her carcasses are going to be a little more lean, but they're pretty hardy. They bring to the table insect and disease tolerance as well as heat tolerance. It's actually been scientifically proven that Brahma breed cattle actually have more sweat pores per square inch than Bos Taurus cattle. And so that, in addition to the excessive skin that they have and the longer ears, all that acts as a radiator to help them diffuse that heat from them a little bit better. Then we get into what I call our niche breeds. So the top part here is our two different niche breeds from the bottom. Top two breeds, Corinthian Longhorns, we think about them as pretty hardy type of cattle. Corrientes are known great for the roping stock, use them in the roping stock industry. Longhorns as well, but we think about Longhorns as providing a really quality lean meat to the table. We look at the two bottom niche breeds there, and both of these are Japanese breeds, the Kushi and the Wagyu. Both those breeds are known for carcass characteristics, fertility, especially on the Kushi side. The Wagyu is going to give us a light birth weight. Now, the difference between the Kushi and the Wagyu, and I think you can see it in these representative photographs, is the Wagyu is going to be a much smaller framed cow compared to the Kushi. And typically the Wagyu is going to have a lighter weaning weight, less sellable product on that purebred Wagyu compared to, say, that purebred Kushi. But both of those breed types are going to be heavily marbling type animals. Now with both those breeds, they come from Japan. And Japan is pretty pretty smart. They did not allow their better genetics to escape Japan. They regulate their exports on their heritage breeds. So both Akushi and Wagyu are heritage breeds. And so when we think about it, those two representations of those two breeds in the United States typically originated from cattle that are probably not quite as good as what the seed stock in Japan was. Now, we've got a phenomenal breeding programs here, so I'm sure we're doing a really good job of breeding up to the same quality and standard that the Japanese have for those two heritage breeds in their country. But they're both well known for the carcass characteristics. Let's look at some of the composite breeds out there. These are actual breeds that have breed registries. So there's Beefmaster, Brangus, and Santa Gertrudis. And likewise, the Santa Gertrudis, there's also one now. It's called the Santa Cruz. And Santa Cruz and Santa Gertrudis were both developed at the King Ranch down in South Texas. And they're designed for carcass characteristics, growth, maternal characteristics, as well as that tolerance. Likewise, the Brahma breeds, the Brangus has heat tolerance. That's a Brahma Angus cross, so it kind of melds best of both worlds of the Angus and Brahma together. Beefmaster has really, in the last few years, seen an increase in popularity. A big part of that is due to the fact that they got the Clay Center, Nebraska USDA research station has a germplasm study. They did a study a while back and looking at efficiencies. And Beefmaster across all the breeds either ranked number 1 or number 2, depending on if we're talking about cow, heifer, or steer. So they've really started getting some popularity in the industry based upon their efficiencies. They're genetically, they're half Brahma, half a quarter Hereford, and a quarter Shorthair. So they do a really good job of melding the Bos Indicus and the Bos Taurus heat tolerance, but also cold tolerance. I was reading an article a while back. There's actually a Beefmaster breeder in Alaska, and the cattle are doing very well. So they kind of meld all the best attributes of all the different breeds that are combined into the species. So they're kind of a new popularity out there. Let's look at and talk about crossbreed.
Hey, Robert,
Yes, ma'am.
can you tell us if Santa Gertrudis is Bos Taurus or Bos Indicus? Someone was asking that.
That's a great question. So all these Brahma influenced breeds and composites, they're kind of a mixture. It's just going to depend on what is the predominant breed that's in there. So the Santa Gertrudis, I would still qualify as a Bos Taurus if it was me, because if I remember correctly, there's 3/8 Brahma influence in the Santa Gertrudis. So I would still, being that that would mean there's 5/8 English in there, then I would classify them as Bos Taurus. That's the way I would classify them. A geneticist might classify them. So moving on, let's look at some of the crosses out there. So I started off this slide with the English and Continental crosses. So the most popular of those crosses out there on the left-hand side is just that Black Baldy, the Angus Hereford cross. Oklahoma State University this last year published some research that showed that Black Baldy cow actually is higher in efficiency than the representation of the two parent breeds put together. So that's a good demonstration of heterosis by having that. Limflex is Limousin Angus put together, makes a really nice cow. Can be a little on the framey side, but not a bad cow. Balancers or Gelfie Angus crosses. You look at that calf there, well, look at the depth of muscle and definition of muscle that calf brings to the table. They do a really good job. Also, the Gelfie breed is the Bos Taurus answer to the Bos Indicus. Gelfies were originally red-hided when they came to the United States, and they bring a little more heat tolerance than some of the other English and Continental cattle than the others. We look at some of the Brahma influence crosses out there. On the left-hand side of the screen, you got the Super Baldy. Basically, a Super Baldy is going to be a composite of these main 3 breeds. There may be others in there, but typically a Super Baldy is going to have Angus and Hereford and Brahman represented in her lineage. Noble is working on a project where we're using some Beefmaster genetic bulls over Black Baldy cows to develop a Super Baldy. So she's Our cows are going to be Angus, Hereford, Brahman, and a 1/8 Shorthorn because the Beefmaster is a quarter short. But the Super Baldy is that cow on the left-hand side. You can see how deep muscled she is, pretty tight on her underline, uh, not too wasty in the brisket and the dewlap. And you cross her back with an English or a Continental bull, and she's going to really tighten up that underline even that much more and give you a calf that's really highly marked. The traditional F1 that everybody thinks about, especially along the Gulf Coast, is that old tiger stripe cow. She's a Hereford Brahma cross. It has that telltale tiger striping to her. She's going to be a really good cow. She's going to stand your herd a long time. An excellent mother. Then you have the Ultra Black down below, which is an Angus Brahman cross. And how is she different than a Brangus? A Brangus is typically 3/8 Brahma influence. Ultra Black is going to have just a little bit more Brahma influence on the cow. That's going to be that Angus Brahma cross. If you were to ask me what are the two composite breeds that a commercial cattleman in the southern part of the United States should focus on, my opinion would be the Super Baldy and the Ultra Black. That is what my personal goal is for my herd. Is I'm trying to use those. I'm a small commercial cattle producer myself. I'm trying to use those breeds in my cow base, and then I'm crossing them back over with the Charolais bull for a terminal sire program. I don't retain any of their replacements. And then we have the old workhorse out there, the commercial Angus cow. There's lots of those cows out there. She's out of an Angus cow and an Angus bull. May or may not have registration papers anywhere close in her lineage. Kind of the old workhorse out there, but done a phenomenal job for lots of folks. But when we think about that commercial Angus cow, we're giving up some heteroses that the Brahma influenced cattle or even the English and Continental crosses bring to the table. So when we think about efficiencies, we think about longevity of the cow, we think about heterosis, we'll talk about it in a second. We're giving that up with that commercial Angus cow, but she has done us a phenomenal job over the years. So, talking about heterosis, crossbreeding. Hybrid vigor and heterosis are one and the same. It's just one is a $10 word for the other. What is hybrid vigor? Hybrid vigor is the increase or the decrease in a particular trait when compared to the average of that trait for each parent. And so we get a kind of a synergistic effect. And so this is a great picture of that baldy cow expressing some heterosis there. And I tell everybody this is kind of Aggie math. If we take 2 + 3 divided by 2, we get 3.5. We don't get just 3. And so, or 2.5, I should say. But we get a little bit better than when we would with the 2 parent stocks. And this is what this table here demonstrates. We have breed A and breed B, and in the middle we have a cross combination. And if we look at, say, if this is weaning weight, if we expect the weaning weight of that composite breed A and breed B to be better than that of either of the 2 parent stock breeds. So how do we get maximal heterosis? Maximal heterosis is developed if we take an F1 cross and cross it back with another F1 cross, especially if we can have outcrosses there where none of the 4 parent breeds are related. So in this example, we have a tiger stripe cow, and we breed her back to, say, a limb flex bull. None of the 4 breeds are related, and we're going to increase the amount of heterosis that we'll have. Now, on the flip side, we can increase heterosis, but in this breed combination, especially if we're in a multiple bull battery, we may decrease uniformity of the subsequent calf crop. And that's important. We have to consider uniformity as one of our selling traits. We think about heterosis or hybrid vigor. There's a couple of ways we look at it. We'll break it out. There's maternal heterosis, which is the increase of the calving weight by 6%, weaning rate by 8%, weaning weight by 6%, and birth weight by about 2%. When we look at this on a tabular format, these traits that are listed here and highlighted in this light yellow, those are all traits that exhibit some maternal heterosis effects. So as I said earlier, about 8% weaning rate, about 6% combined on birth weight, about 11% combined on weaning weight, 18% on calf weaning weight per exposed cow. We want to talk about some huge numbers right here. calf weaning weight per exposed cow longevity, and cow lifetime productivity. Those are three traits where the rubber really meets the road on what's going to have a dramatic impact of your ranch being economically sustainable for the long term. The lower the turnover rate of our cow herd, the better we have an opportunity of being more profitable, because there's a cost associated with either buying or developing replacements. So let's look at some of those costs of the economics. What does it cost? I'm going to say, as an economist always says, it depends. As we add heterosis, we can increase our cow weight, about 6% increase per 100 pounds of body weight. We will increase milk production slightly, about a 1.5% increase in energy requirement per pound of milk produced, and about 2.7% increase in crude protein requirement per pound of milk produced. So the goal is to not get where we have that heavy milk in the cow. Make sure she fits your environment through our stocking rate, our supplemental feeding regimes that we use. So let's look at an actual scenario here. The next few slides are going to be similar. The top is going to be the original scenario. We'll start off with 100 cows, cow breed A versus bull breed A. And we have out of that cross, we have a 525-pound weaned calf. We have a weaning rate of about 82%, which is about the national average. We take the 82%, so 82 calves in this scenario times 525-pound weaning weight, and that's going to give us basically a truckload, about 43,000 pounds of calves to market at weaning. But what if we switched from cow breed A, we keep that the same, but now we use an outcross of bull breed B? We're going to get an increase in heterosis of about 5% for weaning weight. So 5% times 225 means now we have an F1 calf that's going to sell for about 551 pounds. That gives us an increase of 45,000 pounds marketed, or 2,152 total pounds increased. And if we look at the average market value of that calf at that weaning time frame, weaning in October, just by switching to a different bull breed, we're going to add about $5,700 to the bottom line of the ranch. And all we did is we switched to an outcross breed for the bull breed. What if we look at a different scenario? Take that original scenario, cow breed A and bull breed A, but now let's have a good F1 type crossbred cow, just a good crossbred cow out there, and we cross her with terminal bull breed C. That's a third unrelated breed compared to what's in the cows. We're going to get a total weaning weight, total heterosis of about 25%. That's a combination of increased weaning rate of about 90% now from 82, and increasing weaning weight by about 11%. And where we get that is from research that was done by Brent Barnum at the University of Arkansas, in which he looked at, if you look at the terminal sire versus a purchased female, F1 female, we look at the different heterosis percentages there. That's going to help us express close to 100% heterosis, between a 23 and 28% increase in calf weight per cow exposed. So I use just a 25, the average of that. So we increase our weaning weights from 525-pound weaning originally, add 25% to that, and we can get a 656-pound weaning calf. That's a 131-pound increase compared to our original scenario. That sounds excessive, but I promise you, it is reproducible. We've got producers that do that. That's 1,500, almost 1,600 pounds of additional weaning weight to your operation, and a value of about $40,000 increase by using that crossbred cow and a third unrelated bull. So if we add those together, we look at bull effect, about $5,700 if we just change our bull and have that purebred cow. But if we want to look at maximal heterosis, let's go to an F1 cow and use a third unrelated terminal bull breed. We can increase the ranch revenue by about $40,000. After keeping this is just at weaning. If we keep those animals past weaning through a preconditioning program and let them exhibit their additional heterotic effects through growth, we can actually increase this total dollar value back to the ranch pretty significantly. So what is the difference between heritability and heterosis? So heritability is, from a genetic standpoint, we break it out into three traits: reproductive, growth, and carcass. The reproductive traits are the lowest heritable. Carcass traits are moderate, the growth traits are moderate, and carcass is high. And this makes sense because if we think about it, we look at from the 1970s to now, what have we done on carcass characteristics? We have dramatically increased the quality of our carcass grade from the 70s or 80s until now. And that's because we've been focusing on carcass characteristics that are highly heritable. During the same time frame, what is one of the things that's kind of popped up and become problematic? Reproduction. And so as we've driven these straight purebred breeding programs, well, it makes sense that we're going to have some reproductive issues that have fallen into the mix because of that, because they're lowly heritable. If you have a herd that's got reproductive issues, it's very difficult to breed out of it by using the same breed that you've always been using. The best thing to do is start an outcross program with an unrelated breed, and that should help you get out of it. So if you look at these heritability estimates, conception rate 7.7%, calving 8%, fertility 10%, weaning weight 24%. So what this means is this is the amount of variability of all the variability of those traits that I can contribute back to conception. And so it's very difficult to change those through a straight breeding program. Heterosis has its greatest impact on traits that are lowly heritable. So weaning weights, fertility, calving interval, and conception rates, just like we saw from that previous table. And we're getting close to the end here. Let's talk about breed complementarity real quick. And we can't talk about heterosis without it. So what complementarity is basically we're taking the best of both breeds and we're going to get something that's a little better, and we kind of fill in the gaps. A great example of breed complementarity is look at an Angus and a Charolais. If you look at quality grade, Angus does a far better job of meeting the quality grades based upon the data that's out there. Angus are hitting about 85%, probably closer to 90% choice or better now. Charolais are hitting around 60, 65%. But if we look at the other side of the equation on carcass characteristics and we look at yield grade, Charolais does a better job of hitting the yield grade requirements that we want. A lower yield grade number is better in this scenario and compared to Charolais. So what happens is it's not necessarily an additive effect. It's just that we're going to have a situation where the strengths of one breed can complement or mask that of the other. So the Angus is able to exceed and mask the little bit lower carcass quality grade that the Charolais would have. Likewise, the Charolais is going to be able to help augment the quality of the yield grade that the Angus would have. Another example of that in breed complementarity is the growth characteristics that you'll get out of those calves. So this is a good example of a smoky calf that's out of, look at the cow that he's out of right there, or she, that's a heifer calf sitting there, right next to her cow, her dam. She's out of a Charolais bull, and she's obviously, if they're still in the same pasture, she hasn't been weaned yet, and I guarantee you she's going to wean off in excess of that 50% ideal weaning weight or targeted weaning weight compared to her dam. So that's a great example of breed complementarity. So summary thoughts on heterosis: you got to be able to manage for it. It's not just something that we do and just forget about. There's benefits and there's negative attributes. Heterosis will not make up for poor animal husbandry or management practices. So you've still got to be a good manager in order to benefit from those traits of heterosis. And it will not make up for poor bull selection. In other words, you can't be haphazard and just say, if you want to use an example like that last slide of a Angus and Charolais, you can't just throw two of those individuals together and expect to have this phenomenal calf. The old saying, junk in is junk out, is very true in beef cattle breeding programs. So that's going to be the situation there. Final segment, just a couple slides real quick on how do we buy our cattle. Make that game plan. As I said earlier, select your breed that you want to have. Develop that mindset of what individual within the breed that you want to buy. Figure out what the breed of choice is first, and then go find that individual within that breed and select that breed because of the goals that you have. That breed is going to help you meet those goals. Review the data on the cattle, on the bulls, if it's EPDs, if it's on the cows. Review the management that has been applied to those cows and ask for their weaning weights. Ask for their mature cow weights. Ask for body condition score. When was that body condition score taken? All that information can help paint that picture and help you develop the game plan on what you need. And you cannot do it without a physical evaluation. All too often nowadays, I see people that get into there where they just want to look at the numbers and they buy over the phone because this animal has great numbers on paper. If he doesn't have or she doesn't have structural integrity, and you're going to be breeding that into your cow herd and keep retaining replacements out of it, all you're doing is setting up that mare to haunt you for years to come. So he's got to have the data to fit the goals. He's also got to have the phenotypic traits that are structurally correct, or she's structurally correct, that's going to work for you in the long run. And then set your purchase price before you get there. It's real easy, and especially in an auction situation, you get carried away and caught up in the bidding process. If you have a hard time hearing, bring somebody with you that's used to going to auctions. This last fall, I was with a producer, and he thought he was bidding at $5,000 on a bull, and I leaned over and I told him, "You realize you're at $9,500." He was like, "Oh my gosh, no." Thankfully, somebody else pushed the bid one more time, and they got the bull bought, and he didn't. But that can happen real easy in the fast-paced situation of a sale barn, or not a sale barn, but a production auction situation. So if you've never looked at a sale catalog, this is what they look like. In general, you'll have a lot number, the name of the bull, look for the birth date. There's a registration information. There's the registration number, because not all of the EPD traits are going to be listed in every catalog, especially when we look at like Angus, because Angus has so many EPD traits that we can work off. So go look that registration number up on the website for that breed association. You'll find a wealth of information in the back there. This is a 3-generation pedigree that's listed there. That's pretty typical. And then here's some of the EPD traits that they have listed. Now it's not uncommon to see genomic data listed. I typically tell people I only want to look at the genomically enhanced EPD. If I look at the genomics and the EPDs, that's double accounting, because the genomic information is already accounted for in that genomically enhanced EPD. As I showed earlier, go to the breed site and look at their percentile rankings. And remember that these are not static numbers. These percentiles, especially for Angus, they change, I think, every week or every other week basis. Many of the other breeds do it monthly, and there's a few still that do it quarterly or every 6 months. But before you decide to make a purchase decision, go download the most current percentile breakdown. Like I said, it's easy. Just type in that, go to any search engine, type in the breed name, and then EPD percentile, and it should take you right to that breed association page. And then what I always do is I take an Excel spreadsheet, I put all the information in there, and I start filtering through and reviewing the data. And I start identifying those bulls or the cows that meet my requirements. I highlight them in green, and those that don't, I'll highlight them in red. And that way, when I get to the sale or that producer's place, instead of looking through everything he has to offer, I've only got a handful to look through. And that gives me more time to really concentrate on the animals that I really want to spend my money on. And then, like I said, evaluate them in person. Are they doing this in the pen? They're fighting each other. If they're doing that in the pen while they're at the sale, regardless if there's people around, they're probably going to do that and be hard-headed at home too. So evaluate them in person, not only for docility, but like I said, for that structure. Make sure that they haven't been injured in the fighting or something like that. And last but not least, remember that you are in the business of producing beef. If you're producing 1 head or 1,000 head, that 1 head, if he's really good, helps inflate the industry. But that 1 head, if he's really bad, he helps pull everybody down with him. So we got to keep that in mind. No matter how big or how small you are, you have an influence on the industry. So with that, there's my contact information. Gabby, do we have any questions?
Yes, yeah, we have one over in Q&A. Where can I find info on best records / information to collect on my small herd? Most efficient records I keep are weights from the sale barn to evaluate how a cow is performing.
Okay, so I would, in that regard, I would also add in, get your cow weights. And that's an easy one to do, one of a couple ways. Hopefully you're not letting the cows die on your property. Hopefully you're selling a salvaged cow at some point in time. Take into account when you sell that cow, we get a sell ticket on her, and it's got a weight on it. And think about, kind of make some notes before you leave with that cow in your trailer. Was she poor? How poor was she? Was she a 1,100-pound frame, and she should have been a 1,300 pound when she was at her prime? So think about it that way. She. What I mean by that is, you look at her, and everybody can look at her and go, "Wow, man, I wish she was." She used to look really good when she was probably 150, 200 pounds heavier. And make a note of that, and then when you get your cell receipt from the cell barn, you know what she weighed. Add that to her, and that kind of gives you a baseline what your cow weights are doing in your herd. So that's an easy way you can do it without owning a set of scales. The other thing you can always do, pretty much just about anybody in the country is not that far from a set of certified scales. Anywhere along the interstate, you'll find a set of certified scales at these truck stops. You go in there, take the truck and trailer, weigh it empty. Here in Ardmore, Oklahoma, I think it cost me $12 to weigh an empty truck and trailer, and then go back and fill it up with a set of calves or a set of cows or whatever. Come back across a set of scales. They don't charge you the same price for the second trip. Here in Ardmore, it cost me $3 for the second trip. And therefore, I've got my full weight, I've got an empty weight by division or by simple mathematics, substitution, or subtraction, I'm trying to say. I can find out what my weight of my cattle were and then divide that by the number of head. Now I know about the average weight of the cattle that were in that trailer. So do that. Those will get you some baseline information. Record how much feed, how much hay do you put out, how much mineral do you put out. That's a place where a lot of people think they're spending lots of money, and more than likely, more times than not, people are cheating their cows, not providing them enough mineral compared to what they should be getting. Keep those records. There's great online record keeping tools out there that are commercially available that are reasonable. For a small cattle producer like yourself, it would probably cost you about $9 a month to be able to have those records, and you can have them, they're in the cloud, so you can access it from your smartphone, from a tablet, you can access it from a computer sitting in your house, wherever, and you can have multiple users. So if you've got somebody that checks cattle for you and you're an absentee owner, you can have it where they have the ability to put in, hey, this cow calved on this day, and I think the calf weighed this many pounds, but they can't see any financial information. So there's different levels of usability that they have, or user access. Those will be ways that I would look at trying to find or starting to record that information. Hopefully that answers your question on that. If not, type it in there real quick. We'll go from there.
There's another one that, do you think we'll be going into a drought this spring or summer? You're not quite the weatherman, but
I'm not a meteorologist, but I have slept at Motel 6, so I'll take a stab at it. I grew up in South Texas along the Gulf Coast and Mexican border. Our family's right on the Rio Grande River. And moving up here to Oklahoma, one of the first things I learned when I moved to Oklahoma is we're only 7 days away from the nearest drought. And I think that's, if it's 7 days or 2 weeks, I think that holds true with anybody or just about any part of the country. Now, with that said, Noble pays for some meteorological advice, consultations, and whatnot. I just looked at one this morning. They think we have reached the apex of the La Nina for this year. So we should start to see the tapering of La Nina. La Nina means more for our part of the southern hemisphere, southern part of the United States, less water availability. So that's the way I remember La Nina is less water, or less agua. El Nino is typically the wet side of that cycle. There's 3 phases we can have: La Nina, El Nino, or neutral. According to the data that I saw this morning, the meteorologist that we subscribe to was thinking that we've reached the apex of the La Nina, or the lower water environment. Moving into spring and summer, we'll go into a neutral zone, and then long term, they think there's a possibility August, September, that's as far out as they went, there might be an uptick in La Nina again. With that said, that I try to pay attention to weather. If you're going to be a consultant in agriculture, you've got to understand a lot of weather. It's not just about La Nina and El Nino, but we also have the Atlantic Oscillation, as well as I believe they call it the Pacific Blob, which is up along the Canadian and Alaska coasts, that can impact the direction or the path of our jet streams from the combination of La Nina and El Nino. So with all that said, right now I think we're in a dry cycle. this summer. Of course, summertime's always kind of dry anyways. I think what the weatherman that I subscribe to is saying is La Nina will start to subside during the spring months and go into neutral, which means neutral means that they really don't know. Could be La Nina, could be El Nino, could be just normal. So that's my stab at trying to figure out what the weather's going to do. And I hope that you give me the same latitude that we get with our nightly news weathermen, that I can still be wrong and you'll still come back to me for more information later.
Okay, and we don't have any other questions out there. Just many people thanking you for your time and everything today. And I know this one is a longer topic than our usual, so I know we covered a lot today. And Robert has consistently put his information out there. So if other questions arise, just feel free to send those to him or to us, and we can facilitate that. We did have someone earlier ask if we could get a copy of your slides, Robert. So if you're comfortable with that, I can share that on the email too afterwards, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that would be fine. And Gabby, I can send you a PDF of that, or if you'll send me your link to your, I think it was Dropbox, send me that link again, and I'll drop the PDF over there.
Okay, we'll get that presentation out after the class, and the recording, as I said, will go out 2 days after the class. So on Thursday, we'll probably just send those together. And I guess if anything else arises, just feel free to reach out to Robert or to us. And then as a reminder, again, someone asked earlier when our next class is. It's February 16th. It's a virtual again, and it will be a law enforcement and market inspection update covered by our Executive Director of Law Enforcement here at TCRA, Scott Williamson. We'll cover that one. So February 16th, again at 1 p.m. Virtual. So I think that's about all I have. Do you have anything else, Robert?
No, I appreciate everybody's time, and I know we went a little long, but that was what I was asked to cover. That's a lot of topic material to cover in 2 hours. So y'all just got a semester education in genetics and breeding in about 2 hours.
Yes, for sure. Okay, well, thank you so much, Robert, for your time, and thank everyone for your attendance today, and we will send this out in a couple days.
All right, appreciate it. Thank y'all.
Yes, sir. Thank you.